A man sitting at a podium at Aalto University in Finland on June 14, 2012, said something that stopped the room cold. He had just been asked about the one place his creation had failed. He paused, then said it plainly. He started Linux as a desktop operating system, and it is the only area where Linux has not completely taken over. That just annoys the hell out of him. The man was Linus Torvalds. The operating system he built in his bedroom in 1991 now runs 90% of public cloud workloads across the world's 3 largest cloud platforms. It runs every single one of the 500 fastest supercomputers on Earth. It runs the phone in your pocket. And yet the machine sitting on your desk or your lap almost certainly does not run it. That single fact is what this video is about. Linux held 44.8% of the global server operating system market in 2024, with projections placing it above 50% by the end of 2026. Among the top 1 million web servers worldwide, 96.3% run Linux. Microsoft Azure, which is Microsoft's own cloud platform, runs 61.8% of its virtual machines on Linux. Google Cloud runs 91.6% on Linux. Every single machine on the top 500 list of the world's fastest supercomputers has run Linux without exception since November 2017. That is 8 consecutive years of total dominance at the very top of computing. The Android phones running in billions of pockets worldwide run on the Linux kernel. And then, there is the desktop. Somewhere between 3 and 4.5% globally, depending on which measurement you trust, and how many privacy-hardened browsers are being counted in the unknown category. Torvalds built the thing specifically for the desktop. Servers, supercomputers, phones, none of that was the plan. The plan was a better operating system for his own personal computer, and in every domain except the one he aimed at, it won completely. The core answer Torvalds gives is simple, structural, and more damning than most people expect. Most people do not install operating systems. That sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but it contains the entire explanation. The reason Android runs on billions of phones is not that 900,000 people per day were downloading disk images and flashing them onto their handsets. It is that Android ships pre-installed. The consumer never makes a choice. The choice was made by the manufacturer, by the carrier, by the retailer. The consumer picks up the phone and it runs Android. That mechanism, pre-installation at the point of manufacture, is the only mechanism that has ever delivered a consumer operating system to the mass market. It is how DOS won in 1981. It is how Windows won through the 1990s. It is how Android won the phone market. No operating system has ever achieved mass consumer adoption through user-initiated installation alone. Not one. And Linux, on the desktop, never got pre-installed at scale. Torvalds said it directly at Aalto. There have been companies like Dell that will pre-install Linux if you are a large business that specifically requests it. But it is something where you have to ask, and it covers a very limited portion of the machines they sell. It is not something common. And if you do not get the pre-installs, you are never going to get desktop dominance. The question that follows is, why did Linux never get pre-installed? The answer goes back to 1980 and a contract. In the summer of 1980, IM needed an operating system for the personal computer it was about to launch. IM approached Digital Research, which owned the most popular operating system of the era. Those negotiations collapsed. IM then went to a small firm called Microsoft. Microsoft did not have a suitable operating system. It acquired one from a company called Seattle Computer Products and licensed it to IM under the name PC-DOS. The critical detail is what Microsoft retained. IM did not get exclusive rights. Microsoft kept the right to sell the same operating system to any other manufacturer under the name MS-DOS. Within roughly 1 year, according to Microsoft's own documented record, MS-DOS had been licensed to more than 70 other companies. By the late 1980s, some version of MS-DOS ran on over 80% of personal computers worldwide. Every new PC manufacturer that entered the market found the same ecosystem waiting: software written for DOS, users trained on DOS, businesses dependent on DOS. The rational decision for any new manufacturer was to pre-install what the customer already expected. Then, from 1988 onward, Microsoft used a licensing mechanism that made any other decision financially punishing. It is called per-processor licensing. Under a per-processor agreement, a computer manufacturer pays Microsoft a royalty for every machine it ships, not for every machine it ships with Windows installed, but for every machine it ships full stop. If a manufacturer builds 1,000 computers and installs Windows on 900 and Linux on 100, it pays Microsoft for all 1,000. The Linux machines carry a Windows license fee even though they do not run Windows. The effective price of pre-installing Linux was not zero. It was the full Windows royalty, paid twice. The Department of Justice filed a civil antitrust complaint against Microsoft over this practice in July 1994. A consent decree was entered on August 21, 1995, prohibiting Microsoft from using per-processor licenses going forward. By that point, the practice had run for 7 years. The OM ecosystem was locked. The software ecosystem was locked. The user expectation was locked. The consent decree ended the mechanism, but it did not undo the outcome. Linux was announced publicly in August 1991. By the time it existed, the per-processor trap had already been running for 3 years. 2 compounding factors made recovery harder still. The first is about hardware. The desktop is harder to support than any other computing environment that exists. In Torvalds' own words from the Alto session, the desktop really is a different market. You have to support every single printer a consumer can walk into a store and buy. You have to support the mom-and-pop shops that do not know anything about computers, who will go to a random store and buy whatever hardware or software they find. You have to support researchers at universities doing work nobody else does, on machines configured in ways nobody anticipated. And you have to serve all of them simultaneously with the same operating system on the same hardware. In the supercomputer market, you tell the people who paid $10 million for their machine exactly which printer to buy, and they buy it. In the tablet market, there is a limited set of devices and a limited set of use cases. On the desktop, the combination of hardware permutations runs into the millions. Every graphics card, every wireless adapter, every piece of industrial equipment someone has plugged in via USB. The challenger arriving from outside faces all of it at once, while the incumbent has had 30 years to work through it one device at a time. That is not a solvable software problem in the short term. It is an accumulated advantage measured in decades. The second compounding factor sits inside the Linux ecosystem itself, and it comes from Torvalds' own experience building software. Application developers who want to ship software to end users build one binary for Windows. They build one binary for Mac. For Linux, they build for Fedora 19. They build for Fedora 20. They build for whichever version of Debian happens to be current. They build separately for each distribution's library versions, each distribution's packaging conventions, each distribution's assumptions about where files should live and what shared libraries should be present. Torvalds described confronting this directly while working on his own Divelog application. Shipping for Windows and Mac was predictable. Shipping for Linux was a different engineering problem for every distribution the team tried to support. The result is that commercial software developers make a rational economic decision every time they evaluate Linux support. The potential market is small. The engineering cost to serve that market is multiplied by the number of distributions. The decision to deprioritize Linux is not hostility. It is arithmetic. Torvalds made a prediction in that same period that has proven accurate. He said Valve, the company behind the Steam gaming platform, had the leverage to force a different approach because they would not bother accommodating distribution fragmentation. They would bundle everything an application needs into the binary itself. The binary gets large, but it actually runs everywhere. Steam on Linux today uses exactly that model. It is not a coincidence. Miguel de Icaza, who co-founded the GNOME desktop project, placed some of the blame on developer culture rather than market structure. He argued in 2012 that the Linux kernel team's culture of treating internal interfaces as freely breakable had spread to the desktop, driving commercial developers away. Torvalds rejected that attribution sharply the same week, calling it laughable. His position was that the kernel had always maintained one core rule: never break external interfaces. What the GNOME team did with their own interfaces was their decision, not a culture inherited from the kernel. That dispute was never resolved. Both accounts contain documented facts, and reasonable people in the Linux community have taken both sides. Your machine almost certainly runs Windows. And the reason is not that Windows is better, it is that the manufacturer put Windows on it before you ever saw it. That decision was shaped by 30 years of licensing agreements, ecosystem lock-in, and economic structures that made any other choice more expensive for the people selling you the hardware. Torvalds said at Alto that the biggest hope at the time was projects like the Chromebook, Linux-based, pre-installed, requiring no action from the user. That prediction has also proven accurate. The US crossed 5% Linux desktop share for the first time in June 2025, driven partly by Windows 10 end of support, pushing users toward alternatives. The mechanism Torvalds identified as the only viable path, pre-installation at the point of manufacture, is finally beginning to happen at a meaningful scale. Whether it moves far enough to change the desktop balance is a different question, but the structural door that was closed in 1988 and pried open by a DOJ consent decree in 1995 is, for the first time in decades, open a little wider. Linus Torvalds built Linux for your desktop. He has said publicly, more than once, that losing the desktop is his personal failure point. The evidence says the structural deck was stacked before he started. The per-processor licenses, the ohm lock-in, the 30 years of incumbent advantage, none of that was a Linux problem. It was a market structure problem that Linux arrived too late to dismantle. If you found this video useful, subscribe. This channel covers the technology decisions that shape the machines you use and the companies that profit from them. Are you already running Linux, or is Windows still the only realistic option for what you do? Drop that in the comments. It is a question worth a real answer.